you should be getting a better idea of the kinds of questions, the fundamental kinds of questions that philosophers ask with regard to value. And we just spent some time figuring out what are some questions asked in ethics. Obviously, there are a lot more questions, but I wanted to get you a feel for the basic questions. Now, a branch of ethics is political philosophy. And the way I explain it is political philosophy is ethics regarding the state or the government. That is, questions specifically about the government. And recently, in recent election, we've been hearing about issues in the election having to do with the candidate's political philosophy, the president or the candidate for president's political philosophy, his view of what government ought to be. And it's really a question of what government ought to be. Large government, small government. These are questions that come in our everyday voting decisions, certainly. And some of the basic questions that are asked in political philosophy is what ought the relationship be between the person and society? And I think to kind of explain that question asks, well, what does society owe its citizens? That is, what does the government owe you in particular? You were born here in the United States. You're part of our society. What does the government, what does society owe you? Safety? I mean, is that the only thing? That is police protection and army? Is that what the government owes you? Do they owe you an education? A college education? A four-year education? To whom? A recent controversy based on the Affordable Care Act, or what's called Obamacare, is health care. Does the government, does society owe you health care? Do they owe you a job? These are all questions within political philosophy. What does the government owe you? And then the question going in the other direction is, everybody has answers to that first question, but this next question people usually don't think about as much as, what do the citizens owe society? What do you, as a citizen in our society, owe our society? Or for that matter, what do you owe the government? Since, especially, if you've decided that the government owes you anything in that last question, or society owes, what are you responsible for? I mean, are you just a free rider? You're there to get society, you're there to be a leech off society? Or ought you do certain things? What kinds of things should you do? And under that, in that category, I mean, few things to think about. Do you have an obligation to pay taxes? You go to the cafeteria, you buy a soda, you buy a meal, they're charging you sales tax. You buy a candy bar, they're charging you sales tax. Do you owe them the sales tax? Income taxes, that's the way the government is funded, or at least the federal government is largely funded through individual income tax on what you earn. Do you owe that to them? If so, how much? Do you owe them everything that you make? Everything? I mean, there's a view that's been expressed recently by some in the political arena that people aren't paying their, quote, fair share. Well, the question here in political philosophy is, what is your fair share? Is it a certain possession of what you own? Is it what you make? Is it everything you own? And then there's another question that comes up. My third question is, and obviously there are more than there's three questions, but a serious question, especially it's become critical recently. Do you have an obligation to provide service to your society or your country? That is, if you think the government owes you protection, that is, to provide a safe environment for you to live in, Well, should you have to be involved in that? Compulsory service in the army. There are countries in which even getting started in the police, that the police is an arm, or the police is a branch of the army. There are countries that is that the right thing to do? And then the question, when you were talking about the obligations of society, the question is, who ought to be there to enforce these obligations? That is, what is the just form of government? And over and above that, is there any just form of government, or is government itself immoral?